So it says in Revelation that the number of the beast is 666, but the footnote in this person's translation says that some manuscripts say 616. They go on to say that 666 appears elsewhere in the Bible, the talents of gold paid annually to Solomon. So maybe related in a more accurate translation. They're really curious to know what your guys' thoughts are. Welcome to this week's episode of The Follow-Up, where we recap this week's sermon so you can grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. I'm here with Pastor Adam and Pastor Jeff. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you guys, too. Yeah. We're recapping Revelation chapter 13 today. So if you want to go back and watch any of our past Revelation follow-ups, you can go back and watch them on our YouTube channel. But today we're diving into chapter 13. You guys ready for this?
I think so.
This was a weighty chapter. There's a lot.
This was a weighty chapter.
Yeah, a whole lot.
Yay. Okay, here we go. What aspect of this chapter do you find most compelling or challenging personally?
I can go first. Honestly, because I mentioned it in the in my sermon. I think, especially since this is a personal angle, there's the middle of the chapter talking about like believers being like slain and captive, and like just like the reality that that the beast is talking about conquering the saints. And I mentioned in the sermon that like that personally I have an idol towards comfort. Like I don't like to be uncomfortable. Like and I have to kind of will myself into like uncomfortable situations and to endure. And so sitting in these texts where it's like, okay, this is speaking about, which we're approaching it kind of, this is the present time in between Christ's first two comings, like that we're called to endure. We're called to endure hard seasons and suffering, and we're honestly even called to die, which, and I think that there's a part of me there's a little twinge of like, okay, yeah, when hard things come, that the Lord calls us to do things like that's not something strange happening, as other scripture and James and stuff would say. That's actually part of the plan, like that we are called to endure in the here and now. And so that sometimes that is death. Like sometimes it's literal death, sometimes it's death to self, and in a myriad of different ways where we recognize that our treasure is not in our personal comfort in the here and now. And so like personally, that's a area where I kind of have to crucify my flesh, so to speak. And so yeah, I think that was a struggle for me personally, but
yeah, I would agree to that in my own study of that there's always that aspect of suffering where it's one thing to observe, and to see it happening in the lives of other people. It's another thing to personally experience it. And within chapter 13, there's one way of looking at it, that if you're looking at it as a futurist perspective, that this is all just future and you believe the church has been raptured and not experiencing it, it's like, wow, that kind of stinks for them, but we know about it, but we don't have to experience it. Right. If you look at it more in the idealist position that we've been teaching through, that this is, like Jeff has been saying, in the church age, and that we are experiencing these things now, that dynamic of realizing that ultimately there are times where it's not going to be based on how we vote that we're made better, or that the day is won out, or that we can avoid certain things, because there is an authority that the beast has been given, that the enemy of God has been given within parameters where he has the ability to conquer the church or to seemingly silence the church. But that's uncomfortable, to think about and to talk about, because especially for us, we can hear about the suffering, around the world, and we can be like, well, I'm really glad I don't have to go through that. But there are different compromises and different challenges and difficulties that we do face that we need to be aware of, where it's not always the loss of life, but the times where it's the loss of our voice, or the loss of our influence, or the fact that we know what the right thing to do would be, and yet the majority around us, our voice has been diminished, and we don't have that kind of influence, and we can't change that. And that's I think where it's hard too. So I think the aspect of looking at Romans 13 and in a sense almost feeling like the underdog, like it doesn't look like we're winning. that can be difficult. But then again, where it's so important for us to realize it's just one chapter of the story. That's not the ultimate, and we're going to see victory that's happening in actuality, even through what looks like losing right now. Mm-hmm. But I think coming to grips with the discomfort of it personally, I think that hits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you think is a common misconception or frequently asked question about this chapter that you encounter? I know there's a lot.
Yeah. Gosh, I mean, do you want to go first on this? I was
going to say, can you just explain 666 for us? I mean, I would say that was that's one of the big ones. Absolutely. I mean, when people think about Revelation, oftentimes this is what they think about in the details of Revelation 13, because you have the dragon. You have two beasts, that first beast that comes out of the sea that has been identified as the Antichrist, even though Revelation doesn't say Antichrist. That's what people attribute him to. And then the second one that comes up out of the land that there's like religious exercise given to, or the false prophet he's referred to later on. And then when it talks about the mark of the beast, I think that's a big question people have as far as, well, what is that mark? What if I accidentally take the mark? Or people saying, I'm not using debit cards. I'm not using credit cards. I'm not using anything. I'm not using Apple Pay because what if that's the mark? I'm not getting vaccinated because what if that's the mark? And so there's a lot of question, I think, that comes up as far as what is the mark of the beast? What is this 666? What does that look like? How can I make sure that I don't accidentally do it? And so I think really when it comes to this chapter, the questions really lay out that way as far as what does it look like to live my life faithfully for Jesus and not attribute some accidental worship or devotion to the beast. And I would just say for the follower of Jesus, if you are faithfully following Christ, the beast or beastly ways are going to be apparent, that we're not going to be tricked. It's going to be something that is very divert, or very clear for us as far as that it goes contrary to what God would want for us. It goes contrary to his character. It goes contrary to what he's told us through his word. It's holding something else other than God as the ultimate authority and means of devotion and means of being able to do anything. So, in one regard, I would say it's a means of putting people at ease, that they don't need to worry about something accidentally happening, but to remain vigilant, to remain faithful in studying God's word, in fellowship with other believers. And even in that, the importance of having other believers in your life that can kind of talk you off the ledge at certain points and to pray for you and encourage you. And where we not just jump into conspiracy theories or be fearful, but really just thoughtfully and clearly follow God's leading.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, just related to that, I think just the mark of the beast and having a fixation on the identity of the Antichrist and the false prophet, seeing those as, that's got to be a literal person or persons. I've got to figure out who that is. And so the mark of the beast then gets tied to that of like, okay, let's figure out like how these names figure out. And that's why I think there's different beasts and false prophets that have been suggested in every age. And I think the misconception is that we're supposed to be fixated on finding that. Mm-hmm. And I think more often than not, John's using, Rome or Nero and these pictures of his time to say, hey, like this is going to appear different in every age. There's going to be different empires and nations that are going to come along in every age. And you go, that maybe that's the beast. Maybe that's the Antichrist. Maybe that's the false prophet. And the fact is that was one of the verses referenced in Matthew 24. Jesus says there's going to be false Christs and false prophets with an S. Yep. So Christ is even recognizing, hey, there's going to be a lot of them, and you're going to see this. And the way John speaks of the spirit of the Antichrist, like you're meant to go, oh yeah, that looks like the beast. That looks like the beast. And to your point, like what are we called to actually fixate on? What are we called to to focus on. We're called to focus on Christ. We're called to focus on the mission. We're called to focus on evangelism, not as just a command, but as a literally spiritual warfare, that we're called to be faithful in the proclamation of the gospel, to endure. There's one theologian who even sees baptism as spiritual warfare, because baptism is this sign of like, this is my allegiance. This is this outward symbol of that I follow Christ and I belong to him. And so, so I think the fixation on the mark of the beast, the fixation on these identities, and that we're supposed to figure that out versus going, no, I need you to be aware that this is how the enemy is going to work, and he's going to work like this in every age. And you're meant to focus on me. You're meant to meditate on the goodness and the beauty and my faithfulness, and then walk in accordance to that. So
yeah, just that aspect that, man, this is a lifelong battle that we face, right? That it is continually patiently enduring, remaining faithful to the Lord, that it's not like, wow, I just got through that battle. Because as we look at the beast, it's not just, we got to vote that guy out, or we got to, vote for certain policies. It's a matter of, we don't conquer the beast through our vote or through our policies. We conquer the beast by our faithfulness. And the spirit of the beast, it reminds us that it's not just one person. There's a worldview, there's an ideology that's opposed to God. And so how do we overcome that? By remaining faithful, by patiently enduring, even in the face of difficulty and suffering. And that's a lifelong process, so that it's not like a one-off. Phew, I got through that. And I think sometimes we might like that idea, like, man, that was a difficult time. That was really hard. But realize, man, there's gonna be more of that throughout our life.
Right.
Yeah.
Despite some of the daunting imagery in Revelation 13, is there a message of hope or comfort that believers can take from it?
Yes. Yeah.
Simple
I mean,
answer.
it's hard, I think, to see at points, because there's so much time that is given to the beast, right? And to the actions of the beast, and to the world's response to the beast. And there's so much emphasis on that. But I do think there are some tidbits within chapter 13 where we do see, the world is worshiping the beast, but for those that names are written in the Lamb's book of life, they are not. And so even that picture of the security for God's people, that we need not fear, even in the midst of the rest of the world doing something, that Jesus still has us, right? And so within that, there is a hope and a confidence and a reminder that for us, in a worldly perspective, it doesn't take us having numbers or having a majority. It takes Jesus. And Jesus has overcome, and we are secure in him, which I think fuels our faithfulness. I think fuels our endurance when we realize Jesus is going to see me through. So why would I give up now? Why would I lose hope? Why would I be anxious? Why would I be fearful? And those are all things, admittedly, that we can struggle with. But I do think the hope is that there is a bigger picture than just the circumstances we find ourselves in that are really, really difficult.
Yeah. And I think that there's some specific indicators in the text that I think are really comforting. One, like we mentioned already, like it was predicted, like this was a part of God's plan.
Right.
And so it's not like there's this chaotic force that's being unleashed and it's got a power of its own and it's wrecking shop and nobody saw it coming. It's like, no, this was actually part of the plan. And there's a number of times where you see that it was given authority. It didn't take authority. Like that it was literally, it had to be given. And so even the dragon, the beast, like the whole unholy trinity, like they're given authority, and they're not just given authority, they're given authority only for a time. Like, so it's that 42 month, that figurative, like trial time, whether that's, some people see it as a literal 3.5 years. Some people see it as a symbolic time of 42, with like Israel's time in the wilderness was 42 years. You see that it's termed. And I think that there's so much you can endure if you believe that there's going to be an end to the suffering. Like, I mean, this is a kind of a trite example, but I used to remember when I would study, like I'd have like these all night study sessions. And if I could think, I would often think about, what am I going to feel like after I'm done with the test? Like, yeah, I'm going to suffer through like the studying, and I'm going to get through and try to memorize all this information. But if I can just imagine what it's going to be like when I'm on the other side of this, then all of a sudden it was like, okay, I can push through, like I can see the end goal. And I think sometimes it's hard for us because we can't always see the end goal.
Right.
Whether that's like the ultimate end of Christ coming back, or our ultimate end of like when we're going to see Christ face to face. And so that, again, that's where the call to endure, like, this is just a season. This just is a moment. And I gave these things authority, but ultimately I'm sovereign. And so they're not running loose without any level of like, they can do whatever they want. They are given authority to do certain things in a certain time, in a certain place. Like they're in a cage, so to speak. And so they can do a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong. And that's what we see. We see death and destruction and slavery and all those kind of things. But no. Hey, remember who's in charge. Remember who's ordaining these things. And he loves you.
Absolutely. So as a pastor, what do you hope your congregation takes away from the sermon on this chapter?
Yeah, there was a pastor or theologian a while back that he said that he saw his greatest responsibility is to prepare his people to die. And that was his greatest calling as a pastor, was to prepare them for death. And it was vague as to whether that was their death, because I think there was a part of that. Like, are you ready? Should you meet your end to meet the Lord face to face? Like, are you in right relationship with him? Have you been faithful? But also a death to self. And so I think that as heavy as that is, preparing our people to die to themselves, to be ready to face the Lord, should that come tomorrow, should persecution. I mean, we live in kind of a comfortable area of the world, so I'm not fearing that someone's going to burst through this door and arrest us and put us in jail and that kind of persecution. But yeah, that preparation of like, okay, like I need to be prepared to walk into hard spaces, to walk into possibly death, if that's what faithfulness looks like for me in this season, versus the compromise of, if I just take this mark, if I just walk in some of these ways, I'll avoid the consequences of those things. And so, yeah, I think that sounds really morbid, but preparing to die, like preparing for our death, and all that means. So,
yeah. I think along with that, my goal within the preaching is not just to inspire. It's not simply to come away having people feel good. I think in correctly preaching the Word of God, there is an aspect where we're encouraged, but encouragement is different than just feeling good. And within that encouragement, to be equipped. And in the equipped, meaning that you are prepared in facing the day in and day out of struggle and heartache and joy and difficulty and opposition and looking at the promises that God has for you. And so my goal would be that people are equipped to faithfully and cheerfully, joyfully serve Jesus. And realize that when it is difficult, it doesn't mean that they're doing something wrong, and it doesn't mean that God is unfaithful. God is already prepared, and I think you did a great job in even just laying out how God has prepared us for the difficulty so that we're not surprised by it, but at the same time that we don't lose hope, and that we realize this is what Jesus told us would happen. And this is what has happened, what has been revealed now to John. And so now how do we go about it? And so to be equipped, to be encouraged that God provides us everything that is necessary in order to be faithful and in order to endure whatever it is. And that we have the hope that, and we've said this throughout Revelation, that in the end, we win because Christ has won, because Christ has secured the victory. And above everything else, to draw people's attention and affection to Jesus. Ultimately, we can't control people's affections. We can't even control where they focus. But what we can do is just continually try to point, continually try to point and show the magnificence of Christ, that we would become more and more devoted to Jesus in the times that we live.
Yeah. We're going to switch gears. We've got a couple congregation questions that came in. Okay, so it says in Revelation that the number of the beast is 666, but the footnote in this person's translation says that some manuscripts say 616. They go on to say that 666 appears elsewhere in the Bible, the talents of gold paid annually to Solomon, so maybe related in a more accurate translation. They're really curious to know what your guys' thoughts are.
Expert Jeff? No?
Yeah.
No, honestly, I mean, for me too, I didn't look into the 616. It didn't come up a whole lot in my studies of it. As I looked at a little bit in the studies, some of the 616 they said was in some of the manuscripts over the years that have been translated that maybe wasn't as strongly believed to be as reliable as some of the manuscripts now that we've depended upon. So it's kind of out there as a possibility. But I would say even within that ultimately it doesn't impact the interpretation of what is being said, so that's where, sometimes people have taken the 666 and they've taken the Greek and then they've put it into Hebrew and they've taken the numbers and said, well, that could be actually Nero, because there was a way of writing where you would take names and actually kind of not translate, but transform them into numbers that it signified a person. And so that's where some have said, and they take the numbers and they say, well, this could be Nero that John was talking about with the 666, and so referring to Rome. But I would say ultimately within the beast that John is talking about, there was an aspect where Rome was the beast. So there is an applicational quality to that, but that at the same time, the beast is throughout the church age in beastly ways, where it's not only talking about Nero. So within that, the 616 or the 666, I think the more reliable texts more continually reflect 666, but ultimately, I don't think it makes much of a difference.
Yeah, and to your point, like I think all the research I had done after seeing some of the question and in some of the commentaries before was that there were some manuscripts that came a little bit later, and they look back at even some of the early church fathers, and Irenaeus was one they pointed back to, that he had seen some of these 616 manuscripts, and in the 2nd and 3rd century, whenever Irenaeus was there, didn't see them as reliable. As far as like I don't know if it's gematria or gematria, this letter math that was common at that time. They said the 666 was taken Hebrew to Greek and doing Nero Caesar. 616 was Latin, was like the Hebrew to Latin and doing Nero Caesar. And then there's also an argument you could do beast. And so there's a lot of, because you can do a lot of math, that's where there's been a lot of confusion throughout history of like presidents and religious leaders who people took their names and were like, look, this adds up to 666 or 616 as well. And so I think, again, it's we're not meant to be fixated on like figuring out a specific person, because I think there's a better than not chance that Nero and Rome are these types that John's using to say these things are present in every age, and it's more than just fixating on, okay, there's one specific individual, but these bestial characters are going to appear in different forms in different ages. And so, everything as far as research was that 666 was the more reliable, which I think is, when you see that, Bible scholars are trying to be transparent in the sense of they put 666 because they believe that's more reliable, but they want to own up to the fact that there are a couple manuscripts that say 616. And so I think that's actually one of those things where you go, I can actually trust my Bible. Like they're not trying to hide these other areas. They're saying, there's some of those in here, just so you know, like that number is out there. But the reason we still had 666 in here is because we believe that is the more reliable translation. And so I trust those experts. I'm not a Bible scholar, to be able to say that and see that from history. So that's kind of, I guess, some initial.
Well said, Jeff. Well said.
Thanks. Do I look smarter with my glasses?
That was great. You do.
I
I
did.
was thinking
Somebody
as I'm
told me.
listening to you, I got to get some glasses.
Just for the follow-up.
Right, just for the follow-up.
Okay, last question. Is there any significance as to why the first beast came out of the sea and the second beast came out of the earth?
Yeah.
Got some weighty questions this time.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, one of the things that I've seen is that, you know, oftentimes in Jewish literature, not just in like the Old Testament, but the enemies of the Jewish people were pictured as Behemoth, the beast of the land, and Leviathan, the beast of the sea. And so even in the book of Job, you see those two beasts that are reflective of something powerful that is against the people of God. And so really believed that here's kind of this picture that goes along with Jewish history and literature that is in a way conveying almost like worldly powers and that which goes against the people of God. And so kind of following along with that theme. So yeah, to kind of see how it carries out throughout kind of redemptive history, these pictures that it alludes to, I think is actually the significance of it.
Yeah. No, I love the idea of it because I saw Behemoth and Leviathan. They mentioned that a few times. And what's really cool is in Job, you have this tirade where God is saying, "Where were you when I did where were you when I created these things? Where were you? And who are you to question my authority?" And he starts to talk about his authority over those beasts,
Right?
His authority over Behemoth. And
Well, and
Leviathan.
even describes, he even goes really into detail about Leviathan, like its scales and everything, and like how horrific it is. But then the point is, he has power over it. Like, and all the details, like if we were describing like a shark, like its rows of teeth and everything, that would be so horrifying for us. And God's basically like, yeah, look at all this, and even pointing out all the power and the intricacies and things that might be horrifying for us. But God's like, I have power over that. I'm in charge of that.
Yeah, and I think everything that I had seen, there was a lot of just conjecture. Some of them were as simple as the difference between the sea and the earth was just so they could differentiate between the two. Some were saying they were both came from the abyss, one from the sea, which was, you know, characterizing chaos and evil, and the other from the abyss of the earth. And then even the earth, like the second beast is kind of pictured in a much more subtle, deceptive form. Like when you got the lamb come in, but he's speaking like a dragon. Like there is this subtle deception where he's wanting to kind of almost come incognito, which is what good deception, good lies, and false prophecy does. Is it has like this characterization that it's coming in the form of something you can trust, but really it is demonic in nature. And so, so there were a number of things. There were a number of really weird translations of, oh, it's coming from the earth, so it's going to be a Jewish person or a Gentile person, and a lot of it was conjecture. But I think at the end of the day, if we're looking at this, a lot of these things as symbolic. I think there's a differentiation between the two. I think the Behemoth and Leviathan is, because John loves to make these Old Testament allusions, is a good way to think about like these two beasts that they're terrifying to, you know, the culture at that time, and they seem completely out of control, but God is the one who's still in control of these like hugely powerful beasts that everybody else is terrified by and can engage. So, and he created them, like, and puts them in their bounds, and so.
Well, thank you guys for going through all these questions for Revelation 13. We will see you guys next week as we dive into Revelation chapter 14 on the follow-up. You can always join us live on our YouTube channel on Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. Central to watch our sermon from our Bellevue campus. If you want to watch the sermon in full, and then come back on Monday afternoons to catch the follow-up live on our YouTube channel. We'll see you guys next week.